Hello and welcome back. You're tuned into TMH Daily English News. This headlines for today: Tigrayan government has urged the international community to deploy a robust package of punitive actions against the Abiy Ahmed's regime. Decisive action to end the blockade on Tigray is needed to be similar to the one that has been taking on the issues of the Ukraine and Russia conflict. And insecurity in Ethiopia has caused major inflation throughout the market whole. As we move on to our main stories for today, international communities urge the deployment of a robust package of punitive actions to compel Abiy Ahmed's regime to accept the International Commission of Human Rights experts on Ethiopia. Tigray government today released a statement through its External Affairs Office on the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights statement during the 49th session of the Human Rights Council. The government of Tigray alluded to Abiy's regime reluctance to accept the legitimacy and the mandate of the independent commission, and it also indicated that there are credible reports that this regime has presented two conditions for cooperating with the work of such commission. The first being, the condition is the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights acceptance of the OHCHR and the EHRC joint report, lock, stock, as well as barrel. And the statement also said once the results of the joint reports are taken as final, what is left is, of course, the implementation of the recommendations over which the Abiy Ahmed regime has unlimited sway. The second condition is that the UNHRC agrees to undertake a joint investigation with the EHRC into allegations of rights violations in the Amhara and Afar regions. According to such statement, the Abiy Ahmed regime is looking for a mechanism to legitimize as well as cement its fictitious narratives about the genocidal war in Tigray, whitewash its criminal record, evade any accountability, and to make sure it secures international imprimatur for its smear campaign against the Tigray forces. The statement underlined that Abiy Ahmed's regime's conditions are non-starters as far as the people and the government of Tigray are concerned. It also added that UNHRC is accepting such conditions would render null and void its own resolutions establishing the independent commission to begin with. The government of Tigray regretted that the High Commissioner did not even exhort the regime to accept the legitimacy of the Commission of Human Rights experts on Ethiopia that they themselves established. In related development, the government of Tigray reacted to what it called dangerously erroneous explanation for the suspension of humanitarian aid into the Tigray region. According to the statement of the government of Tigray, the High Commissioner for Human Rights claimed that the fighting in Awala, its environs, was to be blamed for the obstruction of humanitarian aid and delivery into the Tigray region. The statement also said there is no ongoing fighting at the moment, adding that insofar as there was brief fighting between the Tigrayan forces an assortment of irregulars in the area, as well as including Afar Special Forces, Eritrean mercenaries that had been crossing over into Tigrayan territories and launching attacks. It was one that was imposed on the Tigray army. In no time before, during, or after the fighting have aid trucks been prevented from passing through Tigray by Tigrayan forces themselves. And again, according to the statement, the authorities had not completed the issuance of the clearance for the movement of trucks that have been transiting to Tigray by the timing fighting broke out in late January. It referred to the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs that stated no humanitarian supplies have been delivered to Tigray by road since mid-December, when there were no active hostilities in the current area. Furthermore, no humanitarian workers have also been cleared to travel by road to Samara, Timala since October 28, 2021, clearly establishing the Abiy Ahmed's regime of the obstructive intent and the blockade imposed within the region. In fact, the UN Relief Chief Martin Griffiths had, as far back as September, even accused Abiy Ahmed's regime of erecting a de facto humanitarian aid blockade, strongly demanding to get those trucks moving, as he said, and the humanitarian situation in Tigray has just gotten progressively worse since Griffiths made these above claims, and the Abiy Ahmed regime continues to tighten a deadly chokehold on the region and the civilians of Tigray. The statement said if Abiy Ahmed's regime and its domestic allies believe their own manufactured explanations, there is a solution: allow unfettered UNHAS flights to Tigray with expanded cargo and capacity. The government of Tigray said in the statement above, at a time when the world is rightly gripped by Russia's brutal assault on Ukraine, the international community should not continue to turn a deaf ear to the agonizing pleas and the pain of Tigrayans for the help, and the government of Tigray as well. Supporters of the H.R. 6600 have taken to Twitter opposing U.S. Congressman Don Beyer, who is campaigning against the resolution. On Twitter handle said supporting H.R. 6600 is advocating for peace as well as stability within the country of Ethiopia. Opposing it is supporting tyrants and killing innocents. Stay on the right side of history, wrote Representative Beyer's actions. U.S. Congressman Don Beyer, who is chairman of the U.S. Congress Joint Economic Committee, told a group of die-hard supporters of Abiy Ahmed that those who introduced the bill, H.R. 6600, are completely wrong and that he will do his best to get the proposed resolution withdrawn. Let's take a listen.
Also, many of you realize that there's a new piece of legislation called H.R. 6600, introduced by my friend Tom Malinowski. Tom and I co-chaired the Egyptian Human Rights Caucus, and we've been fighting for the end of political prisoners and all the freedom of the press and things like that in Egypt. But I think Tom is completely wrong on H.R. 6600.
Yes!
And there's no way I want to be able to vote for it. Because what he's done is essentially by sanctioning the Ethiopian leaders, he's made it more difficult to get peace, more difficult to get a dialogue to bring people together. So anyway, I will continue to do everything I can to try to lift up that situation and make things better there.
Tigrayans and their sympathizers have been urged to step up their campaign to counter this move by Congressman Don Beyer that aims to evade accountability for the atrocity and the crimes committed on the people of Tigray. And if you want to be involved within this campaign, everything is readily available for you on the SJT official website. Staying with SJT, the international community has been urged to take decisive action to end the blockade on Tigray, similar to the one that's been pursued on the issues of Ukraine and Russia. Security and Justice for Tigray, also known as HJT, made the call in a letter it sent to David Stratterfield, United States Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa. SJT said the international community, with the U.S. leadership, has acted decisively to hold President Putin accountable and end punishment for his bellicose actions as well as in Ukraine. The SJT statement added that a similar decisive action by the international community can't stop Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's cruel and destructive actions in Tigray. In an interview on the 26th of December 2021, Stratterfield's predecessor, Ambassador Jeffrey Feltman, indicated that Tigray Defense Forces commenced their strategic return to Tigray in part due to demands from the United States. Feltman stated that this action by TDF should trigger an end to the conflict, that should trigger a shift to negotiations, and that should also trigger an end to the human rights abuse and full humanitarian access to those who need food, medicine, fuel, and cash, as well as amongst many other things. So right now, that is what we are pushing for, to push for the reality that Tigray Defense Force are back in Tigray and they're willing to end this war. The SJT added that U.S. leadership should act to end the siege, ensuring humanitarian aid reaches those in need before many innocent civilians succumb to hunger, disease resulting from Abiy Ahmed's brutality and the de facto blockade. SJT noted that time is running out for many of the residents of Tigray. SJT also said a U.S.-based global advocacy organization of Tigray and Tigrayans Americans of Tigrayan descent globally have had the statement to be sent to the congressman. Staying with the cause, insecurity in Ethiopia causes major inflation, and the latest sharp increase in commodities is the price of cooking oil. This week, the sudden increase has sent officials scrambling for answers. The price of a pack of 5 liters of edible oil soared to 1,000 Ethiopian birr at retail stores this week, up from just 600 last week. The war in Tigray and tensions along the Sudanese border during the harvest season, which affected logistics as well as its supply. Before the war broke out in November 2020, Western Tigray sesame farms produced a third of Ethiopia's total exports. Since the war, however, Western Tigray is under Amhara state administration along with Eritrean security forces. Data on the sesame cultivation of the year 2021 are just hard to come by. Although inflation has decreased 33.6% in the month of February, down from 34.5% in January, the prices of basic commodities continued to go through the roofs, creating shockwaves among consumers. The most aggravating issue remains the unavailability of foreign currency and the need to buy crude palm oil as well as replace machinery. Fortune newspaper reported that the monetary policy that the government is using to cover its expenses, monopoly of the country and retail market system by a few, the constant expansion of the exchange rate between the dollar and birr, doubling of prices in some products in the international market, such as steel, edible oil, fuel, are said to have contributed to this ongoing inflation. Our final news for today, Human Rights Watch urged AU member states to provide prompt and adequate redress for civilian victims of laws of war and violations. Human Rights Watch has made this call in a brief it submitted to the African Union. Human Rights called for provision of support of redress for civilian victims in armed conflict by setting up a system to rehabilitate them in a context of civilian casualties and property damage. It also said those responsible for war and the crimes committed during this war should be prosecuted. Human Rights argued and urged AU member states to criminalize all forms of violence against women and girls and ensure the women and girls who are survivors of violence have access to all of the necessary assistance as well as including information, medical, psychosocial services, and just merely support. The submissions draws on lessons learned from Human Rights Watch research and continued engagement with the African Union policy and human rights institutions. Human Rights Watch research shows how recruitment by armed groups is fueled by grievance about state failures to respect fundamental rights, ensure justice and accountability for abuses, and deliver basic goods and services. This often further compounded by summary executions and forced disappearances, arbitrary arrest, and torture of suspects and others suspected of supporting the armed Islamists, often simply based on ethnicity and near total impunity of just such crimes. The brief said that in keeping with the AU ambition of promoting Pan-Africanism, ideals of people-centered union, AU member states should speak up, break ranks with peers that are committing serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law. That concludes our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.